Tell me.
All right, so he came to Bloomington from San Antonio with USA Insurance, where he did project management in Y2K efforts and earned his PMP certification in '98. And he then started helping State Farm usher in project management and PMP discipline. And he's been at State Farm 3 times, totaling over 7 years. Mixed in with numerous consulting, coaching engagements in Greater Chicago, Indiana, Peoria, and Decatur across 7 industries. Dan's teenage daughter asks him recently, and I think we will too by the end of this, is when are you going to get a real job, Dan? He's married. His daughter says that. I'm just reading what he gave me. Dan is married to Brandy, who has been with State Farm 17 years, and when he's not watching University of Michigan sports, he gets in some workouts on his mountain bike, mostly on paved trails for where it's safe for people like him. So if you see him on a trail, all right. So I'm in a silly mood tonight. I apologize. Let's move on to our presentation. Thanks.
Gabby, thank you very much. That's all basically true what she said, especially about Julia, my daughter. She's going to be a senior. Do I sound okay on the mic? All right. Maybe bring it closer. Is that better, Zach? Zach's our tech guy. Whatever he says, I do. So yeah, we have folks online too. How many do we have? 9. Okay. And are they all totally scattered? Because there's going to be a couple group, like a table at your table exercise. So I'm just curious how many different locations they're all in. Okay, so they're not like all in a 1 or 2 spots. Okay. Okay. All right. So as far as the clicker, let's see if this is queued up. Oh, okay. Yeah, you want to switch over to that, Zach? There we go. And is it just the... Okay. Cool. Thank you. All right. So in terms of what I'd like to cover, there's going to be some challenges here because there's probably a wide variety of background and experience in, Lean Agile type area. Some of you are probably dealing with SAFe, which I'll bring that forward here just so it's a little more. How many of you have seen this picture and know it kind of well? Raise your hand high so I can tell. So there's at least 2/3 of the folks here, right? So, and I'm going to move this one other thing over to this side. I might refer to it now and then. We have a pretty good, base of a lot of people who do understand, SAFe in general. And how many people have worked directly on a Scrum team and, really get that? They really get it. Where you could like get up and just talk to someone and explain what it's like and how it's different. how it's different than working in a traditional, role. So this is just a quick, list of some of the sources and references that I pulled from to put together this deck. There's a lot of charts coming. Some of them I'm going to go through pretty quick just to give people a quick exposure snapshot of things. This is not a time where I'm going to be able to teach a whole lot about everything Lean Agile, but I'm going to try to highlight some things that set us up for a part of the conversation that's of course relevant to leadership, and also, for example, like some of the things that we do in traditional, and we say requirements. So a lot of people ask me, how do you handle requirements in Agile? And that's one of the first things I'm going to dive into when I get into the meat of the conversation here. And as you can see, in terms of the source and references, the very last item is the most important thing. Sometimes these conversations over a couple beers are where you really learn the most. So if any of you want to do that after this session or anytime, in the next month or two, let me know. So I wanted to kind of recall quickly the session that we had here with Carol and you know, oh, what was the other lady's name? Carol and, well, it'll be in the chart in a little more detail in a bit. So we'll do a quick look back on that. And this is going to kind of talk about what leaders need to know and be. There's some different things they need to be to their teams and to their organization and do to you know, really make lean, agile product development work in a big organization especially. You know, this is based on having a moderate awareness of the lean, agile product dev. And there's kind of a focus on larger programs here. It's a lot easier to talk about this stuff if it's a really small company and there's just a couple Scrum teams. You know, when we get into large organizations, what we call at scale, that's, you know, like Scaled Agile Incorporated uses that term, of course, and the industry does as well. That's where a lot of these things start getting kind of complicated. So, like I said before, the charts will be, you know, some of them are going to come pretty quick. So this is a chart Carol and Cindy had. They kind of talked about change from a perspective of an individual, like what is it like for the person going through the change. And they talked about this, you know, the middle boxes, the ending, the neutral zone, and the new beginning, where, you know, those are the things that a person is going through. And they were kind of relating it to when a new system's coming into an organization, and leaders are mentioning, there's a big echo in the room all of a sudden. Is that something, Zach, that, oh, there, is that just where I was standing? Oh yeah, I was hearing that too. But anyway, so when leaders kind of talk about some new system changes coming, they're already at the new beginning a lot of times, and other people are still dealing with, well, whatever that new thing is coming, they're like at an ending of whatever they used to do. So some of that will be relevant as we talk through Lean Agile, because there's enough change there where if you really transition from doing traditional project management and waterfall type approach into full-blown Lean Agile, it feels like you're, you know, leaving some things behind and making some drastic change. Oh, and on the bottom here, there's they didn't mention these terms, but I threw them in there just because it's, I think, worth having a little bit later on, especially it'll come up. The early adopters, the innovators, laggards, and Luddites. And I actually hadn't heard that term before, Luddites, but there's a real definition for it that I'll show you here. Right at the bottom, they actively fear or loathe new technology, especially those forms they believe threaten existing jobs. And this is really, when I saw that second part, it's like, wow, that's a really real thing, because in a lot of organizations that I've worked with in the past, there are pockets of people who just feel like whatever they're comfortable with and whatever they do is either going to be turned upside down or totally thrown away. And they're not even going to have a job or a place to, you know, work anymore. So there are people who really do kind of fit this category here. Let me try moving around a little as I'm talking. So this next chart shows how Zach will figure out. He got it. He got us back to stable. So this shows things that hopefully most of us in the room know pretty well. You know, the talent triangle in the upper right. On the left there, those are the 11 interpersonal skills that go along with leadership. And at the bottom is coaching. That's part of what I do in my career. I'm an instructor. I'm a coach. Sometimes I embed as a Scrum Master directly with teams to help them get used to the process and then go on to the next one and the next one, and, you know, get the whole program up and going. Sometimes it's more at the enterprise level, you know, where you're dealing with value streams and portfolios. So I bounce around depending on what's needed. But anyway, this group of things here, there's a few that we'll dive a little deeper into as we work through these charts. And, you know, when we talk about leadership in Lean Agile, I think most of you have heard the term servant leadership. You know, there's things about behaviors and benefits and characteristics and challenges, and there's models, you know, leaders as developers of people, leaders as a conductor, leader as a hero. There's themes, you know, like the collaboration and the self-organization. There's, you know, and there's, of course, facilitating and coordinating. And there's we'll dive a little deeper for a second on self-organizing teams, because I see a lot of times that's something that people don't understand it always very well, or they take advantage of it, or whatever. I mean, sometimes it can be a little tricky to get everyone on the right page of that. But things like in a big company, you don't get to self-organize to the point where you say, well, I want to be on this team, not that team, right? You get put on a team. But there are places, if I jump to the bottom, like Spotify, and I don't know if they're still doing this, to be honest, but for a while, they basically had a culture that said, you know, you're here, we trust you as we hired you, we know who you are, we know what you're capable of, look around what's going on and figure out where do you fit in best. And they literally will let people move around from group to group, within some bounds and reason, but people can self-organize to that level. But in general, with what we do in most big organizations, it's starts off with, here's the program, here's the teams, and how they self-organize is things like their working agreements they put together, how they accomplish the actual work at hand, and they have an increased input too on what work they really do accomplish, more than you would in a traditional environment a lot of times. And they also, I think one of the things you'll see as we get further into this is they have a pretty big role in the planning cycles. Because the thing that's a little different about Lean, Agile in general, and SAFe for sure is that there's actually a lot more planning going on than some people realize. It's in smaller batches, and it doesn't always look out as far, but there's a lot of it going on. These are just some potential references to look up later if you guys would like to dive a little deeper into some of these from Harvard Business Review, talking about leadership competencies. I won't spend much time here or on the next one, but some of these do line up pretty well with things that we teach within SAFe and Scrum and Lean Agile in general. So then the question, from a leadership perspective is like, what's the difference between, being a leader in whatever company and being a Lean Agile leader? And to me, it's about, a lot of times still in today's marketplace, it's about transforming an organization. Maybe some companies are pretty far along and now it's more of a steady state thing. But in general, in the industry, it's a lot still about transforming an organization. And to do that, it's based on understanding. The leadership has to really understand and know what they're driving toward and what they're changing and how it affects the people to be effective. So, and honestly too, if they step up and teach it, that's a really good thing as well. I'll share a story from when I was in San Antonio. I had just transitioned from the Air Force into KPMG, and the Air Force was going through a really major, I don't know, some of you probably heard TQM back in the day, and it was based on the goal, by Goldratt, and they were applying it to their repair cycles across the depots and everything. And the 4-star general for the group that I worked under was literally teaching some of the courses through videos about all the things that were changing and how we were applying lean logistics in the Air Force. And to me, that meant a lot. Like, to have the 4-star general, like, obviously clearly endorsing it and talking about it, understanding it, promoting it, championing it. You don't always see that in a lot of big companies. And a lot of things I say here, just so you guys know, I've been enough different places where anything I say that might sound negative, it's never about any place okay? It's about somewhere else. Because, I have been in I've been in a couple dozen different companies now with my career. So I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And all the goods here, right? I mean, we don't have any ugly or bad here. So, but anyway, so this is a quick snapshot of all these things that you have to start thinking about and learning and knowing to be, an effective leader, or especially like what I do as a consultant, to come in and help organizations figure out, well, what's going to change, how should it change, how does it affect, the people, the organization, the process, everything. And I like this quote in the bottom from Oliver Wendell Holmes, mind that is stretched by a new experience can never go back to its old dimension. And I certainly experienced that. As I learned more and more about Lean, Agile, and Scrum, and XP, and DevOps, and all these different things, I mean, there was so many things that kept making more and more sense. It's like, yeah, that does make sense. It does seem to, it should work, it can work. And it's really, a lot of it is taking, I think, a lot of the things that we say within PMBOK and giving it just another wrapper or another way to actually do those things. Because some of the things we talk about maybe in PMBOK aren't always easy to do in a traditional, waterfall setting where everything's big batch. We're going to spend a few months on requirements, a few months on design, and it works its way through the process. And a lot of times when you're doing that, there isn't that much collaboration because, when you're doing requirements, the VAs are busy, and then it just kind of ripples through the chain. So yeah, maybe some VAs are collaborating among each other, but where is collaboration happening across a whole team? Where Scrum puts those cross-functional teams into place, and they're always working together all the time. Not just the IT folks, but with business. There's this constant collaboration happening, and the level of understanding that people get about what they're working on and what the value is and what's needed and all, and the input they can have to it is just so much different than if we do a pure traditional approach in some cases. So, I think a fundamental truth is that, the leadership is ultimately responsible for the success of the enterprise. And this is true across business and IT. I think in some cases I've seen organizations lead with business, for an agile transformation. And that ends up really being a very healthy thing. If business gets it, and let me put it this way, if I was a business person in a big company, I would want my IT group to do Lean-Agile. I would insist on it, and I would be very involved in making sure all my people were involved in it because I really believe that that's the best way that a business can control what they're getting, and understand what they're getting and see it and know that they're getting the quality. Leadership, though, is key to any significant change. And, the thing about the IT environment we have to remember is this word in blue, knowledge workers. Has anyone ever heard a definition for knowledge workers? Just show of hands or whatever. Go ahead. What have you? Want to share what you've heard about that? Yeah. Yeah, they don't even have to necessarily be any sort of expert, but if they just know more than their manager, they're a knowledge worker. So it's different than what you would typically call blue collar work, right? So if you're in a factory, you can pretty much easily see what's going on just by simply observing. And probably all the managers there came up through the ranks and used to do those specific jobs before or whatever. So they get it. They know exactly what's going on. They can see it in real time pretty easily. And what we do with system development, that's exactly the opposite. It's there's so many things that you don't have any clue as a manager what's really going on, who's doing what, and you might think you do, and you might try to control some of it, but in general, it's really challenging. So this concept of knowledge workers, I think, is really important. And I think the bottom bullet's important too, is to recognize is that there are some people in leadership that, for whatever reason, maybe they don't really have to. Maybe there's always a place to move and still do traditional stuff, or maybe they're close to retirement. They don't want to learn all this stuff or whatever. But or maybe they're going to move on to a different company. Who knows? I mean, but there's some people in the leadership, any company I've been, where it's obvious that person doesn't care about Lean-Agile and they don't want to learn it and they don't want to touch it. So you have to figure out, if you have one of those people in your chain, then all right, it is what it is. There's plenty of others who are engaged in it more to varying levels. So part of the mindset that is very important about Lean-Agile is, the learner, the lifelong learning concept of it. Because, when you look at how much goes into, again, all these different things, DevOps and continuous integration and all these, and some of you are dealing with some of these things. A lot of those things are driven by the fact that we're trying to deliver value every couple of weeks and demonstrate working software every couple of weeks. There's so many things that can change and really should change to get to the point where that's working that I see no end in sight of learning and adjusting and applying, the new technologies. And let's face it, a lot of the software is still catching up. I mean, tools are always second. And just like the Agile Manifesto, with individuals over processing tools. And Tools always lag, and they will, because there's so many things that are out there, and people are piecing together the best they can to accomplish what you'd like to have, your organization look like in terms of delivering value, but it's always challenging. Another important thing I think within Lean Agile companies is having communities of practice where like-minded groups get together and share knowledge. They they can kind of self-organize. They can disband at some time where they can pick their own topics. And I mean, all that can be very fluid within a company. It's maybe a little different than like a mindset of having a role steward for a certain role. It might be kind of a little more broad and bigger arching than something like that. Of course, the leaders operate at all levels. Even at the team individual level, there's leadership that can be shown within Lean Agile at all levels. And really, the leaders have to either be taught or they have to go learn on their own. So to get to that point where they can be out in front of whoever they're trying to lead somewhere, right? And again, with all the Lean Agile stuff, there's enough different and new things out there that a lot of them may be behind their peers even more than, or behind their subordinates or their employees even more than ever before. I mean, there's more change going on in this space than we've probably had over like the last 50 years of a chunk of time. Now in the last 10 or 15, it's drastically changing. And there's things that we call anti-patterns in Lean Agile. One of them is the command and control kind of mindset where you tell people what to do and don't do this, then they start shutting down and they wait. They don't do anything because they're going to get in trouble. And all of a sudden, all these smart knowledge workers that we've hired and invested all this money and time in, they're kind of not being utilized or not contributing because that's the environment that they operate in. And I think then we get almost into chaos instead of collaboration. So here's like where we go really fast. These are all charts I could spend a fair amount of time on teaching, and I would, like in Scrum classes I teach and leading SAFe and different things. I mean, these are things that people have to really understand to apply this later. Unfortunately, I'm just showing them briefly. I think on the far left, there's a picture of the guys who met in Snowbird, to come up with the Agile Manifesto. And of course, that's on the right. And I'd like to point out something too. We say Agile Manifesto very commonly, but it's really the manifesto for Agile software development. If you just say an Agile Manifesto, that means there's a manifesto, a document that is Agile, right? Agile is a verb. So it's a document that moves around a lot or something, I don't know. But when you say it the way, and most people know that really we're just saying it the short way, but it's important to realize like this manifesto is, about Agile software development. And one of the things I think a lot of people don't realize is there's more discipline and rigor in the cadence of things that go on in Agile than really in traditional project management in a lot of cases from what I've seen. When you get into a true Scrum cycle and you have a whole bunch of teams all doing that, and they're operating at the program level and even up through the portfolio, there's a more sense of discipline and routine and structure there than what you see in a lot of other cases. Of course, the Scrum values have been around a long time. The courage, the focus, openness, commitment, respect, and I'll just highlight, commitment means, very specifically in one way, in those 2-week cycles, let's say when you're doing Scrum, that you commit to the next chunk of work that you're going to do. It doesn't just mean commitment in general, like, hey, I'm committed to this project and to this team and to my job. It's like, no, it means like really specifically, I'm committing to me and my team, because there's never really an I in Agile anymore. There's like, it's more about the team's velocity and the team's work and what they can produce, not an individual person. So, that commitment is one thing to think about. It's like they commit to a chunk of work, and it goes up and down the ladder, to support getting things out the door. The principles, the XP principles, I think within SAFe we kind of carve out about 5 or 6 of those and highlight them. There's some others that kind of get, sort of not ignored, but like downplayed or just they're optional. But there's some there that are very important. On the left there, the lean stuff, I really love the lean waste piece, where we've had lean waste for a long time in the hardware world, and it was kind of like looked at it and said, wait a minute, if we apply this thinking, but we, focus it on software, how is that different than what we were seeing in hardware? And actually, the one I have here, motion, that might be one of the old ones that really should belong in a hardware one. I think there's another view I have coming later that I think has the more correct software versions. But that was one group. And then here's another group, Kanban, more lean thinking with the 5 value level things. The DevOps stuff with this loop of things that are happening all the time to continue, having. And let me ask a question here. When you hear the word DevOps, you probably can guess, okay, dev's short for something and ops is short for something, but what's missing or implied in that statement, in that title there, or that heading? Anyone know? And I should at least say it's implied, because the word dev is there, right? Development. The word ops, operations, or testing, right? So some people in Agile, and I want to make sure everyone understands this, we think of testing as part of dev, because if something isn't developed unless it's tested and working, that's built in so much that, when we start a Scrum cycle, our testers are right there with us. They're listening to what's got to be done, and they can start writing test cases the same time developers are writing code. So it's sort of implied, but it's good for people who don't know this or think about it. Yeah, the DevOps is all about that whole chain. It's like, what do we do? Not just and it's 2 parts of automation. It's the software itself. How do we automate that so it can be tested enough to keep cycling through it every couple weeks? Because when you start doing these things in cycles that fast, you have to have things automated. You can't do this manually like we used to. And then the other part is not just testing it, but the pipelines that move the code, through the different levels. So this is, to me, where a lot of the big challenges really lay in Lean Agile, is getting the DevOps piece working well. And that is becoming, it's a huge, huge element of Lean Agile. Here's a few more parts. The core values that come from SAFe. And I should point out, a lot of you are familiar with the chart, but on the bottom edge there's some gray parts, and on the left, those are some of the places where the high-level thinking from SAFe is. And you can drill into each of those and read a lot more about it. On the right, you see the levels, the team, the program, the value stream, and the portfolio. And certainly there's other, there's LESS, there's DSDM, there's Crystal, there's all kinds of other scaled things. But I know that in general in Central Illinois here, I think the people who are doing stuff with scaling are mostly dealing with that. That's why I show it, here in this setting. And these principles that we have here, if any of you are familiar with the principles in the Agile Manifesto, those are all good, and they all drive a lot of really good behavior. But the one thing that they don't necessarily do is go as deep as some of these go another level deeper. Some of these have some pretty serious math in them, and there's just another level of information and knowledge to think about when you read through these principles as well. So if you haven't ever dug into these principles from a SAFe perspective, I would suggest it's worth some time doing. Of course, Deming with the plan, do, study, act cycle. A lot of this, everything in Lean Agile so much relates to that. It's that cycle. And you could even say, oh, well, we do that in traditional waterfall, but in a really big that. It's like, and then at the end of projects, what do we do to learn? Has anyone ever done like this, a little 1-hour session where you capture something, lessons learned, right? Or after action review, and then what happens to those? They get filed somewhere. Who reads them? Nobody else. So there's like an effort to try to do some sort of that, and I know some companies are doing more and more of building that into traditional cycles as well. But I'm talking about some of the things I've seen in places where it literally is just that. At the end of let's say a 14-month project, there's one session and then it never goes anywhere. In Scrum, you're doing, and in SAFe, you're doing it intentionally, and you're like taking things out of there and saying, I'm going to tackle this one thing that within our team we can fix, or I'm going to put this up the chain to management and say, hey, this is killing us. can someone take this on as a thing to fix now so we can do better? So it's a very different mindset to apply. I saw this quote. I see, a lot of you are on LinkedIn. I'm on there under, my name's Daniel Miklusicak. If you guys like to be on LinkedIn and connect with people, I'm always accepting connections. So there's so much good stuff out there. They've done a lot with learning and training that there's so much you can just dive into and read and look at based on who you're connected to and what articles you're looking at. And this is one of the things I saw out there once is like, what if we train the people and they leave? And it's like, well, what if we don't and they stay? I mean, and that's, again, this loops back to not just, the people, but the leaders. It's like, if we're in this space where so many things are new and different, there has to be enough training for people to really get it. And really, this becomes kind of a steady state norm in the Agile environment of learning. So I just wanted to acknowledge, within a big enterprise and even mid-sized companies, there's so much going on already. I mean, there are so many frameworks and regulations. First of all, there's people. I mean, that makes it complex enough as it is. I don't care what you're trying to accomplish. If there's people involved, there's already going to be a lot of complexity there, right? So there's all these things to be aware of. And the people who are going to help with the tables, if they could get the packets and bring them to their tables for now, we're going to get into that pretty soon. Do we have someone from each table to do that? Or just volunteer if you're not already, if someone's not assigned. And yeah, well, and for the people who are on the phone, did that file get shared, Zach, out to them? Okay, so Gabby sent it out. So there's, it'll be related to what you're seeing here and the next chart. So this is a shout out, to something we all hopefully know very well. Some of the PMBOK high-level structure and essential information. And then this next chart about the waste within software development is a little bit deeper on what I was mentioning before. And I love this quote from Goldbrat from the Goal, way back when. That the only way you can create excess inventory is by having excess manpower. Okay? And that's, he said his book in the setting of a factory, and you could walk through the factory and you could see piles of inventory and that were just literally in the way of everything else. I mean, that's a lot of it was talking about bottlenecks and efficiency and all that. And, some of the things he said in there still are used, a lot today. And then Mary and Tom Hoppendieck translated, those 7 wastes into the software version. And here's the one, like where number 4 says more specifically handoffs instead of motion. And when you think what's that word handoff sound like if we're talking about pure traditional project management? Anyone know? What's a handoff in? Handoffs, like I have a requirements document. I'm handing it off now, right, to the designers. And then I'm handing it off to the coders. I'm handing it off to the testers, right? Isn't that kind of the mindset or like what happens in, so in a way they're saying that even that can be a wasteful thing. And of course it depends how it's done and all that, but certainly things like having extra features that we don't need. How many people have heard the stat about like in Microsoft Word, there's like only 30% of it that hardly ever gets used. There's like 70% that's like all this wonderful things it can do and hardly anyone ever even touches it. That would be considered extra features and waste, really. Especially, there may be companies who spend a lot of time trying to build all that, and Microsoft beat them to the punch with the first, early, easy version, and the other company finally came along and delivered something so great, but they already lost the market share. And that happens a lot in our world today. It's more about, that's part of the lean mindset. It's like, what's the minimum thing I can do to get something valuable out there to start my market, going and build my customer base and the loyalty. You can't always have everything perfect up front. So anyway, the exercise is on this page here. So at your tables, I think we have 4 at least here. That's good. All the others have plenty of people. This is, I don't know, how many of you have ever done dot voting? Raise your hand if you did dot voting before. Okay, no one's done that. So open up those packages. there's these little dots, and you each get 3 dots, okay? Now, there's going to be some extra, so don't cheat. Don't vote more than 3, okay? And the color of the dots don't really mean anything, okay? They're just little dots. You can stick them on your fingernails for now if you want to until you decide how you're going to vote. But what we're going to do here is let this piece of paper work its way around each table. You know, it's going to take some time for everybody to vote. So I'm going to keep going while you guys are doing that. And of course, just kind of keep it a little bit, you know, quieter, you know, discreet about how you're handing off the paper. And, you know, you can't really discuss this, okay? These are going to be what you think are things that are wasteful or pain points within, you know, what you see and deal with and work on right now. And part of this we might be able to use for our Agile track on looking at other topics that we might want to dive a little deeper on based on some of the feedback that we get here. Oh, and I should mention, okay, and there's markers, so share those, pass those out, pass out the sticky notes, and on those sticky notes, that's more free-form stuff, okay? Anything that you would like to mention or ask or point out, again, kind of in the vein of, this is causing us trouble or pain or problems within our space, you know, so hopefully you can write it in a few enough words to fit on a sticky note. And maybe you have to write 10 sticky notes to handle all the things that you have going wrong in your program or company or whatever. I don't know. So I'm going to give us a couple minutes to like get this going, but let it settle in on one person starting, do your voting, and then pass it to the next person. Any questions on that process? Okay. Here, and I want to mention the giraffe in the background there. That's where you put your sticky notes about, because the part up that you're doing on the piece of paper, that's going to come to the front of the room here. We're going to have this whole thing filled up with all the dot voting, and your random other comments that relate to, you know, any of these items or anything you want can go on the giraffe. It won't hurt him. All right, so I'm going to keep going on to the next. Well, this is a chart we'll come back to later potentially, so don't look at that one. So this again is another, you know, leadership challenges in Lean Agile. You know, so all the things that leaders have to do, they have to learn stuff, understand it, teach it, apply it. They have to motivate people because some people really don't want to change. You know, some people don't want to deal with any of this. And then they have to help their teams and their company get to a new normal, you know, whether it's, you know, new norms or whatever the new norm is. It helps if they understand organizational change management discipline. You know, there's a couple, at least out there, like Cotter and ProSci and others, you know, so different companies are applying different approaches there. and finding, again, leaders who want to help transform, not just lead in the steady state mode, but to actually do it in like a sense that they're helping the actual transformation. And it wouldn't be a lean agile conversation or presentation if you didn't at least have some Japanese, terms or words in here. So shuhari is something that's very commonly talked about in Scrum, and there's a lot of different words that can like kind of represent that cycle. But here's one basic one: is like following a way of doing something, then breaking the rules, and then transcending the rules. It's like that's like one mindset of saying, well, how do teams and companies get to be great? Well, it's not simply by just doing the basic things that they were taught at one point in time. That's again back to all the knowledge workers. We have a lot of smart people in our companies, and we don't want to limit them to just what we taught them in certain classes or whatever. So this shuhari concept is, I think, always worth pointing out. These things that are circled on this chart, help focus on some of the things leaders deal with the most within SAFe. Like even things like in that top middle area there, the vision and roadmap and the metrics, and like I mentioned on the bottom and on the left, those gray sections that lead to a lot of the values and communities of practice and things like that. And of course, on the far left lower corner, the things that are related to the teams, the agile teams, whether they're doing Scrum or they're doing Kanban, those are all, again, leadership positions. Okay, so I haven't backed this up yet, and I really can't fully back it up in the course of just the next however many minutes I have. But people ask me, it's like, Dan, well, what's different about? And I say, well, compared to traditional approach, Lean Agile is the same, except for these things. And there's kind of a lot of things there, right? Basically, everything. It's all different. There's very few things. When you go from a really heavy-duty, traditional waterfall way of doing things into a absolutely lean agile way of doing things, it's all different. And I'll go into a couple of these in a little bit here, but if anyone knows a place where I'm wrong on any of these, let me know. But from what I've seen, they're all different. So I'd like to take some of the PMBOK knowledge areas and say, and then this, of course, is going way back to, time when I was doing this more and PMBOK side, and I still remember some of it, but my brain can only hold so much. And right now it's holding more Lean Agile than it is all the PMBOK, but it's still, these are all still basic things that make good sense, and really Agile and SAFe does address a lot of them and all of them, but just in a different way. So a couple that I'm going to highlight are, the scope management knowledge area, and time management and quality, and mostly the scope. So we'll get in, and here, wait a second. See this coming in, and then there's these really clear, distinct ones going out, right? You think I'm going to give you something that says, okay, here's the beam coming in, this is the way it, traditional is, and then boom, here's the agile, lean agile way. Well, it's really kind of more like that. It's sort of this blended splash, wow, thing of a lot of moving parts. And, so if you don't understand a lot about Lean Agile right now or SAFe, some of this might be a little bit much, but just try to stay with me. So here's the first chart, like, just the basic word stories. I think everyone in the room knows that we use stories to talk about what we want to build in Lean Agile. And there's a lot to stories because even this is the first quick view of it, talking about velocity, talking about the card, the conversation, the criteria, the types of stories. Here's just a couple few: the spike, the refactor. There's enablers and SAFe. There's a lot of different kinds of stories. They're at various levels. We use this invest, thing to talk about what should a story, how do I know I've written a decent story? And we're using stories to ultimately really forecast our work, up and down the chain, up into features and epics and back down. So, and I love this statement about completing and tasks. A lot of people struggle with, what tasks versus stories or whatever. And there's a very clear distinction of business functionality that's being described when you start off at the very top with epics and you get into, you're doing a value stream and you're talking about capabilities. You're at a program level, you're talking about features. And at team level, you're talking about stories. So it's like, well, tasks, each of those things are very similar concepts, just at different levels. Tasks are like taking the gears and grinding them back the other way, because that's where work's getting done. So those are not the same kind of thing as any of those other levels. They are that's the stuff that makes the stories come true. And those are the things that you would see in some cases in a classical Microsoft project, file, a schedule. But of course here they're handled very differently in when they're written and how they're written and who writes them and when they get done and all that. So stories leads into, one of the important things, of course, about stories is estimating. And how many people have ever played planning poker with cards or online? Raise your hands. So maybe half of the room has. That basically is a really important approach to getting the teams to start understanding and working together and understanding each other and the nature of the work they're dealing with, and basically focusing on just saying what's the relative size of this chunk of work. Lean Agile is very specific about, we don't try to sit down and like plan out a whole, like Microsoft type project type of schedule of work, for the whole effort. We focus, now we do address those things in other documents like roadmaps and program boards and, to varying degrees, but more like, I think I used to hear it called horizon planning maybe. Do we still use that term? Does anyone ever say that within traditional project management? Meaning that the further something is out on the horizon, the less time you try to spend detailing it all out. Okay, but in Agile and Scrum, that's like a huge concept. It is automatic. It's I think still in traditional cycles, there's so much pressure to say, well, what's your scope? What's your budget? And what's your timeline? All of it. How does it all fit together? Exactly. And then keep it that way. Plan the work, then work the plan, right? And it's like, there's a big deal if anything changes. Because then we have to do change controls. And I've heard business people say, well, yeah, if that changes, then you owe me something else. It's like, okay, which company am I in? If I'm in State Farm, I owe you red money. If I'm in the Air Force, I owe you blue money. I mean, it's like, what do I owe you? How can I owe you? It's like, we're all here to try to accomplish whatever's most important for the company, right? But somehow, sometimes it gets to that point where everyone gets so locked in on what we said we were going to do that it's a big deal to change it. And it's like, well, that's not really good or healthy for a business, whether you're trying to be agile or not. It just doesn't make sense. So there's some steps to planning poker. You'll learn those when you go to Scrum Master class or team classes or whatever, but I won't go through all of it right now. But it is just basically a quick cycle of everyone getting a chance to vote without being influenced by each other. And then a Scrum Master facilitating a good conversation about the different votes people have. And a developer might look at a story versus a tester and think, oh, this is the easy, chunk of tasks to do. This is the easy story to make come true. And the tester says, oh, no, you don't understand. This thing is like, it might be quick code change, but there's a huge amount of testing that goes with it. So conversations start happening. So they all converge on, a number that's maybe a 3 or a 5, and they're thinking about these things on the left, like complexity and volume, the knowledge that the team has, and then unknowns and risks. So this cycle goes on forever. I mean, this isn't something you do at the beginning of a project and it's done and then you just move on. This is like part of the heartbeat of Scrum, and safe with program increments and all that. Right, so this is like one kind of a endpoint of me just blasting out a bunch of Lean, Agile, Scrum stuff that some of you maybe have never even heard a lot of before or not, and trying to go a little deeper into focusing on like requirements and scope management. So I let the DAS, right? The requirements, change control, and scope management. Oh my! So those are things that we deal with in traditional a lot. And when we look at Lean Agile, we're looking at a backlog. We're not looking at a requirements document anymore. And really, in big companies, we're looking at many backlogs at various levels. And the highest priority thing is at the top. Like so in PowerPoint, like how many charts can be slide number 1 in PowerPoint? Only one, right? I mean, the tool and logic just tells you something's going to be first. Within, I've been in many meetings where, especially if it's defects, right? If we're fixing defects, all of a sudden we have, dozens of defects or hundreds because we just, made a big, and most of them come out to be high. Whatever all the different ways we try to talk about them, they're all high. So here, the whole team can't do everything all at once. So this is why it's so important to rank order them and let the team take in off the top and get the work done. And leadership is key in this. It's like they have to, teach that and enforce that approach. Like I said, they are at different levels, all the different levels within the organization. And really, they're living artifacts. I mean, they're constantly changing. They're constantly being refined. They're constantly being done. A lot of cases just in time. And with business people highly engaged as the norm. I mean, if you don't have business people, and it depends on the company and how it's set up. But if you don't have someone who's got good, solid business knowledge and can call the shots on what the priorities are, then this can fall apart and get really ugly. So you gotta have that. So yeah, and they own it. This is business. Business drives the work, right, of what needs to get done. So the prioritized items, sometimes there's these different things like spikes and defects and enablers and refactors and anything that's in the backlog is something that just might get done. Just because it's in the backlog somewhere doesn't it's a different mindset again than a requirements document. When you put together a requirements document, you say, this is what I want, And here's the bad thing about that. I probably have a chart that goes a little deeper, but it's one of the antipatons or dysfunctions. Like business start getting worried. It's like, well, if I don't put in the requirements document, I won't get it. So I'm going to put more and more and more in there. And all of a sudden, the requirements document has way more stuff than really probably needs to even get done anyway. And then those things get flooded into the project and the program and the team. And whatever gets done is just sort of now up to chance. Maybe certain things get done because they are easier and others don't. But there was never that intentional management of like, this is most important. Get this done first, then this, then this. It's like, if it's just all dumped on your table and you say, here, get all this done, sometimes you're not going to always be happy with what comes out of that approach. And in backlogs, at the levels like capabilities and features, there's things like benefits are addressed very intentionally. Of course, we have acceptance criteria at all the levels, and we have this definition of done, which you'll see a chart that's a lot more detailed soon. But the priorities are based on, of course, all the things that matter from a business perspective, like it shows here. And there's a concept of weight a small shop first. That's one of those math things I was talking about in one of the principles that if you want to Google on that and learn about it, you can if you're into that sort of thing for now. So the structure, I've mentioned that enough times. And again, using tasks to make these things come true. This is a cool thing in SAFe, if you haven't seen this, is SAFe in 8 pictures, where they take the big, this thing's kind of overwhelming, right, in color and all these parts. They gray it all out, and then they say, wait a minute, if I want to just focus on backlogs, which things matter? And then it's those things that are showing up in color still on this chart. So there's 8 different pictures, like you might want to poke around and see all of them. I'm just giving you, a couple of them in this presentation. And in case you're worried that, Agile, some people really do kind of treat Lean Agile like, oh, well, we're Agile, so we don't do that. We don't have to do that. We don't have to do this, right? It's just the opposite. There's plenty of discipline. There's plenty of rigor. And here's an example of some of it. This shows, the relationship between backlog items and all various kinds, and still not even all the detail of it. This isn't like a work breakdown structure, just so it looks like one, right? Whenever we see, like as project managers, whenever we see at the top and a bunch more stuff underneath, we either think it's an org chart or a work breakdown structure, right? But this is neither. So, all right. So has anyone ever had a project that didn't go all the way to the end and deliver. It got cut for some reason. It got stopped. Raise your hand if you have a project ever stopped. Yeah, pretty much, right? So when that happens, what do you do with with whatever was done up to then? What happens to those 10 months of work and document building and code writing? Shelfware, right? We call it shelfware. And then it becomes dusty shelfware, and then it becomes lost, right? I mean, it hardly ever. So that's like a huge gaping example of waste, when we look back at the wastelands. But this is one of the most different things that, just to reemphasize or to make clear if we haven't hit it yet enough, is that, in traditional, we fix the scope, and everything we're building is all around all that scope. It's like, let's get all this done, and then when it's all done, then we have something to deliver. And in Agile, it's more about, wait, what's the smallest way that we can build something that's tested and valuable, can be even put out in production. And of course, that's challenging in some big companies. Like, there's legacy environments where, between maybe in financial insurance, I mean, there's a lot of companies that have mainframe stuff and COBOL and Pascal still sticking around, and there's cycles that take weeks or more or months to test out certain things. So it's really hard to, you can't get that part to a point where everything's fully tested and all the way ready for prod. And that's one of the investment things. Like, companies have to decide, do I want to chip away at that chunk of the application and put it to a modern platform and get it to the point where we can deliver every 2 weeks or whatever, every month. And of course, there's also a trade-off of, well, sometimes in the marketplace, they don't always want that much change on them all the time. Some people, I mean, I think the industry in general gets carried away with like, oh, at Google, we change things in prod every 7 seconds or whatever. I mean, it's like, well, yeah, or Amazon, well, if you're just updating some content or, simple things, it's, not a ratings engine that's driven by rules and affecting 50 different states and all that. I mean, there's things that do really limit how much you can change at once, but it's like getting to that point where you can do as much as is good for the business. And I think in a lot of cases, big companies still aren't anywhere close yet. They would like to see things, at least certain things, be able to change a lot faster than what we can do right now. So it's like, what does it take to get there? And again, a lot of it goes back to automation. Okay, and I wanted to just show you, like, so the part of the discipline of this idea of definition of done for stories and features, and even at a release level. And really, this is an older version that if you look at it now within SAFe, it'll line up more with the 4 levels instead of these 3 levels. But there's a lot of stuff in there to think about. Just for one little story, that might have basically taken a day or 2 to get done or less, there's a whole bunch of things to think about on the left there, right? And that's where, again, I say, there's a ton of discipline here. And there's a ton of things that go into making, this is how you get quality. Because you don't say it's done until it's met this checklist of items. And of course, one of them is always the acceptance criteria. Did it make, does it accomplish what functionality a business user wanted? But it goes way deeper than that. That thing I just mentioned is the very last one on the list. But things like code coverage and defects related to or whatever. There's a whole bunch of things you can have in here. This isn't even a very complete list. I've seen ones that have 12 or 13 things that are all harder than that. So again, the continuation of that chart, though, with stories, the 3 C's, and the conversation. I didn't talk much about this, but the conversation is so critical. These things that we're doing them just in time, and we're not always writing all of it out in perfection because we don't. We're not writing requirements. We're not writing specs necessarily. So the conversation has to happen. The tester gets to hear it. The developer gets to hear it. They're asking questions about it. They're understanding it deeply right before they go work on it. So that's what's so different. One of the things that's so different about how we handle requirements. We didn't. A group of us really. They're very smart VAs. They're doing the best they can. They're doing really quality work. But then this stuff is just handed to someone else. The VAs are interpreting the best they can what they heard business people say. and they're handing it off to other people who were in those conversations, and then they're wondering, oh, is it this, is it that? Sometimes they guess, sometimes they'll go find a BA, or usually that takes too long, right, to like have a conversation, because that's not the norm. It's not easy to, it's not set up that way. But here, those conversations are like critically important, and everything about the team and the structure is set up to allow those to happen. The hand over the wall doesn't happen. The things that we're going to work on the soonest are the most refined. That's where you spend the time getting those to that point where they meet a definition of ready. Just like we had this definition of done, or when a story is, how we know it's completed, there's even actually a definition of ready that's pretty, detailed. That says, what does the story have to have in it before a team can really take it into a sprint? So, and this, I hit on this middle bullet. The business is not forced to include the kitchen sink. With this thinking, there has to be a level of trust. Okay, it takes time for that to happen, but when the business starts seeing, it's like, wait a minute, if I say I want this item, and within a month it's really done, it's a feature that's important to me, or within 2 weeks, that starts to become like a whole different way of approaching work and operating, and they stop forcing everything into the system all at once. Has anyone ever been on a highway where it's like bumper to bumper, like 1 mile an hour? If that's the case, if you like jam a few more cars from the on-ramp onto every single place you can, does it go faster? No, probably it'll get worse. And that's really what we do in corporate America a lot of times, is like we're just flooding the system, the people, with so much work that it really can't get done. In fact, I like one thing SAFe says about, we're building systems, right? But what we're doing, it's a system that's building the system, right? We're all a system of, coders and testers and software, tools and processes and all that. We're a system building a system. And you can't make a system go faster by, shoving stuff into it sometimes. All right, culture, this third from the back. Culture, a lot of people say, oh, we just need to change our culture, so, or our culture isn't like that. And it's like, well, those things are both kind of true. Culture can change, but it doesn't change easy or soon. It only changes when practices are done repeatedly and cyclically, and it becomes a new norm of like how people look on, or how much level of trust there is, or transparency. And I like this idea, like, we don't say trust necessarily in SAFe. I know we say it in Scrum a lot, but it's like it's hard to measure or do trust. But what you can do is transparency, and also alignment and other things. And all those things lead to trust, but you have to do those things intentionally and do them well for a period of time before you get to the point where the trust starts to grow. Oh, I shouldn't hit that button. So now I'm in the small mode. Let's see if I can get back to the presentation. How am I doing on time? Pardon? Am I early or late? Am I over? I'm over. Get done in 5? We're there. Okay, we're there. All right, so the next section is about, that's kind of a view of some talking about requirements and what's different in Lean Agile, requirements, backlogs compared to traditional requirements. And then we'll look at time management for a bit here. Of course, there's the cycle of Scrum, probably 2 weeks in most places right now. Some are doing 1, some still are doing 3 or 4. In bigger areas, there's a program increment that's a collection of some sprints, and there's some intentional things that are going on at the beginning and ending of both those cycles, with planning and retrospectives and demos and all that stuff. So those are all things that take a while to teach and go through in detail to answer questions that people have. And some of you, I think, already are living and breathing that stuff, but some of you, I know, don't really get all that yet. But this is another view within SAFe where they say, hey, let's just strip away everything, and then let's just put back in color the things that relate to, the cadence. So, you can dive deeper into that. And like I mentioned before, Lean Agile has to address long-term, leadership, stuff. I mean, we still have to make budgets. We still answer to stockholders. We still have to plan, mega dollars And part of the way it's done is very different, you know, in some ways. Actually, some of the stuff at this level starts looking a little bit more like what we would do in traditional, in some cases anyway, but it's really tied to some of the terminology we use. But where this PI3 is a chunk of maybe 10 or 12 weeks, each one is. And you can see as you go later into the distance, there's fewer features listed there because they're again acknowledging, well, we're leaving a cushion. We are still not sure what's most important. For the closest PI, we're going to commit to that. We know exactly what we want. We know how much we can get done with the teams we have. That's committed. The next one is like, yeah, it's pretty obvious there's certain things that we want and need, but we're not going to like overload it with stuff until we get there. You know, it's like that would just be waste. And then when we're looking just within one PI, one program increment, a collection of maybe 5 or 6 sprints, this is what it might look like in one of the initial passes where, you know, you're talking about feature levels because you're at a program and you're saying, well, which features are going to get done when, and probably, you know, like within which iteration, and probably by what team. I mean, a lot of teams work on features together, so this might be like the primary team. And then there's these lines between them where the obvious dependencies are in some cases, either between certain stories or even up at the feature level. And so this is, again, a lot of stuff to take in if you haven't really learned or done or dealt with Lean Agile much before. Hopefully there's some things that are a little bit clearer, or at least you're at the point where you realize how much you don't know or how different it really is and you want to go figure that out. Because I've certainly, when I first started into this, you know, years ago, it seemed simple at first. It's like, oh, Scrum, it's like this really simple little picture. There's a little couple circles there and there's a few roles. But when you apply that, I mean, let's face it, anything we do in a big enterprise is highly complex. But you know, the things it takes to really understand and learn and apply this all is not easy. And I like the, you know, I was looking at Prism, like image search, right, on Google, and then this Toblerone chocolate thing came up, and it's like, well, yeah, that'll help us too with getting through some of this. Chocolate, caffeine, coffee, right, all that stuff helps. So if someone ever says like, oh, this won't work here, this will never work here, well, they might be those definitions from before. They might be a laggard. They might be a Luddite. So don't be a Luddite. That's one of the takeaways from this whole thing. I think I've hit on a lot of the things about the behaviors that can start to go bad in a traditional, you know, setup when things are under stress and when everything's, you know, when it's not going well. These are some of the, you know, sometimes IT hires a bulldog PM. I mean, I've seen, you know, I get a lot of things from recruiters, right? Rockstar PM wanted, you know, it's like really? So, okay, but then they're competing, but really some of the thinking is they're competing with all the other, there's a competition. It's like, which PM can get their stuff, their people, you know, because a lot of times you have people who are spread across so many teams. I didn't consciously mention it. I think a lot of you know this, but in Agile and Scrum, I mean, a person is on a team, you know, and the team has work flowing in through them, and they all work together to get it done. It's a whole different environment. You know, no longer are project managers running around begging, coercing, threatening, or whatever it is to get, you know, people to do their stuff. You know, now you're helping them remove roadblocks that are slowing that team down. And then, of course, even the business sometimes gets in on the game, and they'll hire one of those really aggressive, you know, business side people that are just hounding the team all the time, saying, this has to be done, this has to be done. Yeah, there's so many times I've heard, this cannot be not done on this date. It can't. This has to be done here. And then we get closer and closer to that, it's not going to get done. It has to be, right? And then eventually we get to the date, it's really not done because it couldn't be. It never could have been. It's like, okay, so why do we keep saying this has to be all those times, right? It's like, let's stop, let's back up a second and say, what's the most important stuff? How do we start flowing, you know, work through the system and getting the most important stuff done first? And whatever it is we can get done, that's what we can get done. If we see an obvious, and we can see it in Lean Agile, we can say, wait a minute, based on the velocity, based on the teams, based on the work, we know this can't get done. Please believe us, we have empirical data, add more people or do something. You know, it's like there's a more of an intentional adjustment there than what we have in the other approach sometimes. And some of that is all lose-lose thinking. I love Covey's stuff, you know, like seek first to understand. I try to do that, you know, a little bit with you guys to see where you were in terms of your lean agile background and like what. Oh, and the cards we wrote, we're going to paste them up on the walls here soon, and we'll be able to use these hopefully, you know, for next cycles of what are topics that we should focus on, and from if any come in from online, we can look at those as well. But I don't want to disrupt the whole class. We'll do it at the end, and we'll just make sure they all get up there. And I've mentioned this automation part. Quality, you know, it's paramount. You can't accomplish the fundamental thing that Agile says of delivering stuff to production every 2 weeks unless it works, right? It's got to be working software. It's got to be trusted software. It's got to be high quality. And it's the only way to get to that point of high quality is through automation. So there's parts about the built-in quality that really take digging into. So this is kind of a recap from that chart earlier. It's basically just saying the same thing. It's, you know, how complex it is for leaders in general just to be a leader in any organization, and then to, you know, be in a transformational stage to lean agile. It's even that much harder. So the review part we'll do once we get the charts up here. And then this is just the closing statement. You know, we all do this if we want to. Go forth, learn more about this stuff, teach some of it, mentor others. Here's a plug for mentoring. Where's our mentor guy? I finally said it. There. Oh, there you are. Coaching. I mean, all these different things, improving. And so transformation, you know, obviously, hopefully you get better. Don't just change to just change, but change to get better. And the one thing I'll have to tell you too, I haven't even mentioned, I've seen teams and lean agile environments where it can really be a lot more fun than what we see sometimes in any other setting. I mean, because you really start to get the sense of a team. And that really does make a big difference. And then there's some bonus materials. We're done. That's it. I just went through the bonus materials. Thank you. Here, I'll give you, do you want the...
All right. Thank you, Dan. So you guys are all up to speed with Lean